The bonfire in the center of the Blackthorn territory burned tall that night, throwing orange light across hundreds of faces. Once a year, every mated pair in the pack stood before their people during the unity ceremony. It was a night of pride, of promises, of pack members clapping for the couples who had found each other. Elena Voss had dreaded this night for 3 years. She stood at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed tightly over her chest, though the early autumn air was not cold enough to explain the way she held herself. Under her long sleeves, faded scars ran from her wrist to her collarbone, pale ridges left by claws that had nearly ended her life when she was 16. She had learned to live with the pain of that night. What she had never learned to live with was the way people looked at her when they saw the marks. Her mate, Draven, stood a few feet away, talking to a cluster of pack warriors, laughing loudly at something one of them said. He was tall and broad-shouldered, an enforcer who had clawed his way up the ranks through sheer ambition. When the bond had first connected them 2 years ago, Elena had hoped it meant she had finally found someone who would look past her scars. She had been wrong. Draven tolerated her. He did not love her. And lately, he had stopped even trying to hide it. Tonight was worse than usual because word had spread through the pack that a special guest had arrived. Cale Ashford, the Alpha King, ruler of the Northern Territories and the most powerful wolf in the region, was visiting to renew an old alliance between his kingdom and the Blackthorn pack. Every wolf in the clearing stood a little straighter, spoke a little softer, aware that royal eyes were watching. Elena wished she could disappear into the trees. She glanced at the other mated pairs gathered nearby, watching how easily they leaned into each other, how their fingers found one another's without thought. She remembered being that hopeful once, back when the bond with Draven had first snapped into place. She had told herself that love could grow even where it had not existed at first. She had told herself many things over the past 2 years, most of which had turned out to be untrue. Still, some small, stubborn part of her had held on, hoping that tonight, in front of witnesses, Draven might finally treat her the way a mate should be treated. She should have known better. The Blackthorn Alpha called the ceremony to order, welcoming Cale Ashford to the circle with a formal bow. Cal sat at the head table, a young but commanding man with dark hair and sharp grey eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He nodded politely to the Alpha's words, but his attention moved often across the crowd, studying the pack with quiet interest. Then came the moment Elena had been dreading. The Alpha called for each mated pair to step forward and be presented before the fire, a tradition meant to honor the strength of the pack's bonds. Couple after couple walked to the center, smiling, hands linked. When it was Elena and Draven's turn, she stepped forward on instinct, expecting him to follow. He did not move right away. She turned back to him, silently pleading with her eyes. Draven sighed loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "Do I really have to do this every year?" he muttered, but he stepped forward anyway, close enough to be seen, far enough that no one would mistake it for affection. As they stood before the fire, someone near the front called out, only half joking, "Let's see the happy couple then." Laughter followed, light and easy, the kind meant for teasing new mates about nerves or shyness. Draven, perhaps trying to seem clever in front of the visiting warriors, or perhaps simply careless with a cruelty he no longer bothered to hide, reached over and pulled back the sleeve of Elena's dress before she could stop him. Her scars caught the firelight, stark and pale against her skin. "There she is," he said, forcing a laugh. "Guess I got the broken half of the bond." For a moment, no one moved. Then a ripple of uncomfortable laughter spread through parts of the crowd, some out of nervousness, some simply following the mood without thinking. Elena felt her face burn hotter than the fire beside her. She yanked her sleeve back down, but it was too late. Everyone had seen. Everyone had heard. She wanted to run. Her legs felt frozen instead, rooted to the ground by shame so heavy it pressed the air from her lungs. Then, across the clearing, a chair scraped against stone. Cale Ashford rose from the head table. He did not rush, but there was something in the unhurried way he stood that silenced the laughter instantly, as if the temperature in the clearing had dropped. Every wolf present felt the shift in the air, the quiet authority radiating from him. He walked through the crowd, and people stepped aside without being asked. He stopped in front of Elena, ignoring Draven completely, as though the other man had ceased to exist. "What is your name?" Cale asked her, his voice low but carrying easily across the silent clearing. "Elena," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Elena Voss." Cale's grey eyes moved to her arm, to the sleeve she still held clutched in her fist. He did not ask her to show him, he simply waited, patient, as though giving her the choice that Draven had taken from her. Slowly, unsure why she was doing it, Elena loosened her grip. The sleeve fell back, revealing the scars once more, this time in front of the most powerful man in the region. Cale studied them for a long moment. Elena braced herself for pity, or worse, disgust. Instead, his jaw tightened, his eyes sharpening with something that looked almost like recognition. "Who did this to you?" he asked. The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. It was not the question anyone expected, not "Are you all right?" spoken with polite concern, not an awkward change of subject to smooth over the tension. It was direct, serious, and utterly certain, as though the answer mattered more than anything else happening at the ceremony. Elena swallowed hard. "It was a long time ago," she said. "I was 16. My birth pack was attacked by rogues. Most of us didn't survive. I did, but not without this." "Describe them," Cale said. "The attackers. What did you see?" Elena blinked, startled by the intensity in his voice. Around them, the entire clearing had gone utterly silent, pack members straining to hear every word. Even Draven had gone quiet, his earlier bravado replaced by something like confusion. "There were 5 of them," Elena said slowly, pulling the memory up from where she had buried it for years. "They had markings on their shoulders, like burn scars shaped into a pattern, 3 claws crossing over a circle. I only remember because one of them held me down while another—" She stopped, unable to finish, her hand instinctively touching her collarbone. Cale's expression darkened, something dangerous passing behind his eyes. 3 claws over a circle," he repeated quietly, almost to himself. He turned briefly to one of his own guards standing nearby, exchanging a look that Elena could not read, but that clearly meant something significant. "That mark," Cale said, turning back to her, "belongs to a group my kingdom has hunted for 11 years. They call themselves the Severed Claw. They have attacked 6 packs that we know of, always the same pattern, always leaving survivors alive to spread fear rather than mourning. One of those packs was allied with my own family." His voice caught slightly on the last words, a rare crack in his composed exterior. "My younger sister did not survive their attack." A murmur rippled through the crowd, quickly hushed. Elena felt something shift inside her as she listened. For years, she had carried her scars as a private burden, something she alone had to explain, to endure, to hide from curious eyes. She had never imagined that the marks on her skin connected to a story so much larger than her own small, painful memory. Somewhere out there, other packs had suffered the same loss. Other families had buried loved ones because of the same claws that had once pressed into her own body. It was strange, almost dizzying, to realize that her worst night had a name, a history, and now, perhaps, a chance at justice. She studied Cale's face as he spoke of his sister, noticing the way his composure did not fully hide the grief beneath it. Here was a man who commanded armies and held the loyalty of an entire kingdom, and yet the mention of his sister's death still reached him as freshly as if it had happened yesterday. Elena understood that kind of grief. She had lived inside her own version of it for a long time. "You are not damaged," Cale said, and though he spoke to Elena, his voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. "You are a survivor of an attack that has haunted my kingdom for over a decade. Every scar on your body is proof that you lived when you were never meant to. That is not something to mock. That is something to honor." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes, tears she had refused to let fall in front of the pack for years. She had spent so long believing her scars marked her as broken that hearing them called anything else nearly undid her composure entirely. But something else was happening, something Elena did not immediately understand. As Cale stood close to her, she became aware of a strange pull low in her chest, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the fire nearby. She looked up at him and found him already watching her with an expression of dawning realization. The pack elders standing closest began to whisper. Someone near the front table murmured a word that spread quickly through the crowd. Mates. Elena's heart pounded. It could not be true. She already had a mate, however broken that bond had become. But wolf bonds did not lie, and the ache she felt now, the sudden clarity in Cale's grey eyes, told her a truth neither of them had walked into that clearing expecting. Draven, finally finding his voice, stepped forward with a scowl. "She's my mate," he said, though the words came out weaker than he intended. "Whatever you think you're feeling, that doesn't change what's already bonded." Cale turned to him slowly, and for the first time that night, his calm expression hardened into something colder. "A true bond is built on more than a mark connecting two wolves," he said. "It requires respect, loyalty, care for the person on the other end of it. You had years to offer Elena those things. Instead, you humiliated her in front of her entire pack, and mine, over wounds she carries because she survived something that should have killed her." His voice dropped, quiet and final. "You forfeited any claim to speak for her the moment you pulled that sleeve down." The Blackthorn Alpha, who had watched the entire exchange with a growing sense of horror at how his ceremony had unfolded, stepped forward at last, clearly aware that the eyes of an entire visiting kingdom were on his pack's conduct. "Draven," he said sharply, "your actions tonight have dishonored this pack in front of our allies. As of this moment, you are stripped of your enforcer rank, pending further review by the Pack Council." He opened his mouth as if to argue, but the weight of the Alpha's decision, combined with the disapproving stares now aimed at him from every direction, silenced whatever protest he might have made. He turned and walked away from the fire, from the ceremony, and from Elena, without another word. Elena barely registered his departure. Her attention remained fixed on Cale, on the strange, steady warmth still humming beneath her skin, wherever his presence lingered nearby. He looked down at her, and for the first time all evening, his stern expression softened into something gentler. "I know this is a great deal to take in during one night," he said quietly, his voice meant only for her now, though the surrounding wolves still listened with unabashed curiosity. "You do not owe me anything because of what our wolves seem to recognize in each other. But I would like the chance to know you, Elena Voss, not as a symbol of survival, and not as a bond neither of us chose consciously, simply as yourself." Elena searched his face, looking for any trace of the pity or performance she had feared earlier. She found none, only sincerity, and beneath it, a steady patience that asked nothing of her she was not ready to give. "I would like that," she said softly, and meant it. Cale turned back to the crowd, addressing them directly, his voice carrying the same commanding certainty it had held since the moment he rose from his seat. "Let it be known," he said, "that the severed claw responsible for tonight's revelation will be found and answered for. And let it also be known that scars earned through survival are marks of strength, not weakness. Any wolf who forgets that insults not only the survivor, but every life lost to those who caused the wounds." The clearing remained silent for a long moment, before someone, then several others, began to nod in solemn agreement. The mood of humiliation that had hung over Elena only minutes earlier had shifted entirely, replaced by something that felt almost like respect. Later, as the ceremony continued around them and the fire crackled steadily into the night, Elena found herself standing slightly apart from the crowd with Cale beside her. She looked down at her arm, at the scars she had hidden for so long, and for the first time in 3 years, she did not feel the urge to pull her sleeve back down. Cale noticed her looking and gently, carefully, took her hand in his fingers resting against the ridges of scarred skin without hesitation or discomfort. "Whole," he said simply, as though correcting a mistake that had gone uncorrected for far too long. Elena looked up at him, and for the first time since that terrible night when she was 16 years old, she believed him. Around them, the fire continued to burn, and the pack slowly returned to its celebration, though the whispers about what had happened would surely last long after the flames died down. Elena barely noticed. For years she had walked through crowds bracing herself for stares, for whispered comments, for the quiet cruelty of people who did not understand what survival had cost her. Tonight, for the first time, the whispers did not feel like weapons. They felt like the beginning of a different story, one she had not expected to write. She thought of the girl she had been at 16, frightened and bleeding, certain that nothing good could come from what had happened to her. That girl could never have imagined standing here, years later, beside a king who spoke of her wounds as strength rather than shame. She could never have imagined that the very thing she had hidden for so long would become the reason someone finally saw her clearly. Chaol did not let go of her hand. They stood together near the fire as the night deepened, saying little, needing to say little. There would be time later for questions, for decisions about what came next, for the slow work of building trust between two people whose bond had arrived without warning. There would be time to speak of the severed claw, of justice still owed, of a sister who would never be forgotten. But for tonight, it was enough to stand in the firelight without flinching, without hiding, without shame. For the first time in 3 years, Elena Vos felt whole,